How do we make sure that when I get on this microphone and speak about becoming a husband who shows up, a husband who's trying to know better so that he can do better, my wife is not watching these episodes back and she's thinking to herself, dog, but that's not you, man. Like, you're lying. Hey, what's up? Welcome to That Husband Podcast with me, Black Newborn. This is where husbands try to know better so that we can do better. This is part 2 of our conversation where we are celebrating 10 years of marriage with our wives. If you haven't checked out part 1, stop this thing now. Go back, check out part 1 and come back and be part of this conversation as we continue that. Hey, what's up? Welcome to That Husband Podcast with me, Black Newborn. Here we are husbands who aren't where we want to be, but certainly are not where we used to be. We are imperfect, always failing forward, trying to know better so that we can do better. We have a surprise guest today. All right, you want to stick around to see who the surprise guest is, to hear what the surprise guest has to say. You might be wondering, why does it look like I'm alone? I'm not. Stick around. Our guest is going to pull through and we'll hear what they have to say. So let's continue the conversation. Year 5 till 10, the biggest change for me and my wife was having a child. So we decided to wait the first 5 years and then we had a child on our 5th year into our 6th year. It was a significant change. And if I look back concerning children, the only regret, right? And I know saying regret with children in the same sentence is probably bombs dropping everywhere. But the only regret I have is not having my child earlier. We got married in our mid-20s. And I thought, man, looking back now in hindsight, I made the decision, or we made the decision collectively with my wife to wait for 5 years before we have kids. With all the wisdom we had, with the convictions we had, with the resources we had, we prayed about it, etc. And so now looking back, I'm like, hey, now only because I have a child and I see the amount of energy that's required. And there's a number of factors that speak into why I'm mentioning this energy thing. One, I am older. Earlier on I had energy, so to play with them. But I think about playing with kids, man. And I think this thing happens to us who live in the burbs. Where in the hood and the village, we had the whole village basically raising us. And some of us are products of, the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. But in the burbs, you have to plan, play dates. You have to find spaces where you can supervise your children and be there with them. You've probably heard this line a million times early in the morning when you wake up and you just see this little face by your face saying, can we please play? And you're like, damn it, like, yo, fana. Dog. But listen, there's no streets like we grew up, bro, where they can go play, right? So you have to play with them. And so I think part of my regret is not having kids early. And kids, yes, I'm not, I look back and I'm like, should have had like a couple of them back to back, quick, fast. But that's just me, and it's my experience. But speaking about kids, it obviously significantly changed the shape of our marriage. It changed how we move in our marriage. It's changed who we are. My wife was no longer just a wife or somebody's daughter, but she was now a mother. I was no longer somebody's son or just a husband, but now I was somebody's father, right? And so then that significantly changed how we were in our marriage. And I've shared this before, but for me as a husband, it took me quite a long time, and I think it's still happening for me to kind of snap back into being a husband, so for the first 5 years of our marriage, my wife just knew me as a husband. And so then after that, there's these next 5 years that we've been in, she's known me as a husband and a father. And, as the woman becomes pregnant, a lot of things physically change. Her brain changes, her emotions, everything changes. And obviously then the the title of being a mother. That's something that's added onto her identity, her reality. But in my experience, and I think it's with most wives, they kind of snap back quick, physically, mentally. They kind of come back to being wives at the same time being mothers. And I think it's probably, for me, it was the shock of the responsibility of having to, raise somebody. I've always had dreams of having kids. I've always had visions of how I'm going to disciple my children, pour into their lives, take long walks with them, speak about, life, speak about God, speak about the future. How am I going to train them, disciple them, grow them? What kind of people are they going to be? What kind of relationship we're going to have? I've always been excited by that. But when the reality happens, yo, man, that thing is real.
So I think when you said the whole thing about men adjusting to having kids, like I think you've said it a few times on the podcast, and because I realized that I didn't actually know what you meant. And I think like most people, most moms, like you are so involved with your own adjusting that I didn't actually, obviously you have to adjust because you're a human being, but I didn't actually take into consideration how much adjusting you might have had to go through in terms of being a husband and then becoming a dad and what that would have looked like. I guess perhaps it's also the idea that when you are pregnant as a woman, you're forced to adjust, like your body will adjust whether you like it or not. So you're in this constant sort of metamorphosis that's taking place from the day, you pretty much fall pregnant, you don't even know, and you're having the symptoms, to right when you give birth and, I need to look after this kid. So it feels like I would be tempted to say, well, I'm adjusting. You're kind of just along for the ride. And yet, like when you really think about it, that makes absolutely no sense because we're in the same household. I've changed. I'm no longer just your wife either. I'm now the mother of your kid. Our dynamic has to change. And like, I think I just didn't, that kind of like shocked me. And then I feel like a bit silly because I always think I'm like this super... introspective person who's like trying to always think what people are thinking, at least what you are thinking. So that was a bit of like and even when you said that you're still adjusting in some ways, and I guess it makes sense, right? Like when I look back, it feels like, well, of course you had to adjust as well. And I guess, of course, like if you're a mom who had you're lucky enough to be able to carry your child. I don't know if lucky is the right word, but yeah, we know kids come into families in various ways. But if you've been able to carry your child physically, and like I said, that there is change that's happening to you, whether you like it or not, but it kind of does allow you to constantly remember that something's happening. Versus for the dad, right? Like he's only aware, for instance, that the baby's kicking when he touches the mom's stomach, or if she complains that the baby's moving, or if he sees him or her on a scan, versus for the mom, you're constantly feeling that. So then the baby comes out and boom, life is different. Like I can imagine there is almost a higher level of shock, which I hadn't acknowledged, but that was super insightful. Look at the episode that you did with Hungani, where he speaks about their miscarriage. And watching that episode, again, I didn't realize that I was definitely in the crowd of not acknowledging what fathers-to-be what their experience of a miscarriage is, just because they didn't have a physical loss. And I think that's what he said. He said, just because you didn't have a physical loss doesn't mean you haven't lost, or something like that, And there's friends of ours who I actually even reached out to who had struggled with fertility. And every time they had gone through miscarriage, we'd hear that, this couple, they've gone through a miscarriage, and I'd, always apologize to both of them, but I would reach out to the mom first. Yes, I'm probably closer to her, but it was always, how's she doing? And after that episode, I sent a message to the dad. I was like, I'm so sorry. Like, I just didn't, it's not like I consciously said you don't matter, but I think it's just when it comes to children and babies and the change, I guess women will be vocal because it's happening to us. And maybe, unfortunately, men who are the less vocal species, I never used to want to believe that. But then they kind of just disappear into the background. And so I guess it would then make sense that even when there is a child that gets to, be born and all of that stuff, it's more, how's mom doing? And And it's not to say one is more important than the other. It's to say, how's mom doing and how's dad doing? You know, yeah.
Especially, again, in the country that we live in, where fatherlessness is just commonplace. And so it's hard to even find fathers who are present that you would actually glean wisdom from. For me, I've had a number of those guys around me, and several times on this podcast, we've mentioned that we've enjoyed the benefit of having those kind of guys around us. But you see them and then you think, man, these guys are killing it, right? And you speak to them, and only then do you realize, okay, they might also they're also being crushed under the weight of responsibility, but they're showing up, etc., etc. So I think having those kind of examples, but with the backdrop of what South Africa is, there is like this little added pressure that I might have just put on myself, but I've also identified it in other dads as well, where it's like, yo, man, we need to show up, right? We need to be there. We can't add on to the numbers of fatherlessness in the country. And that's not the primary motivation of why we're staying in. We love God, we love our wives, we love our children, we love our families. We want to obviously raise them and take responsibility. But there is that little bit of added pressure that you just don't want to add to those numbers, right? And you don't want to let your kid be a stat, as it were. And so that's just on me. Not saying that's everybody else's reality, but that was there. That was there, man. How do we do this thing? And so I think that kind of took me time for me to snap back and just be my wife's husband. And over the years, I think God has been gracious. My wife has been super gracious in being patient with me as I find my feet with this new role of being a father while I am obviously her husband. And I think, speaking of that, a lot of us who are married, I don't know if this is a middle class issue or it's a millennial issue, but we tend to have our kids at the center of our marriage, okay? And enough wisdom has said, once that happens and your kid becomes the center of your marriage, then basically your kid comes in between you and your spouse, and there's going to be this gap that's created. And you guys will suddenly wake up one day realizing that you've just coexisted together as roommates that were partnering up in parenting this kid. And you guys forgot that you were married, right? You forgot that you were married. And then marriages tend to crumble like that, especially when the kids then grow up and leave. And so now you're left in the house with this roommate that you've been co-parenting with for the past 18 years, 19 years, and now you guys just don't know how to do marriage together. And so I was aware of that, still am aware of that, and I've been very vocal towards my wife to say, let us not let our child become the center of our marriage. The center of our marriage is God, and us together, loving each other, caring for each other, being there for each other is going to be super beneficial for our child. And so the energy that's required, the love that's needed to nurture, to grow, to disciple, to teach our child has to stem from us. It has to come from both of us first. And we can't then even unwisely and unfairly crush our child, which then tends to happen where if marriages are not going well, and you guys have a kid, what spouses tend to do is they will leave their spouse, not focus on them, but focus all the attention that they're supposed to be giving their spouse, and they give it to the kid. Why? Because the kid is not going to fight you. The kid is not going to remind you of all your flaws. Your kid is not going to remind you that you are not a good lover. Your kid is not going to remind you that you're not taking care of your finances. Your kid is, all the stuff that your spouse would challenge you on. You leave all of that and you focus on the child, but you're not realizing that you are crushing the child. The kind of love or relationship that you're expecting this child to give you is only supposed to come from your spouse. And so this kid is crushed under this weight. And so, I was just very clear with my wife from day one. We're not going to do that. If we're having issues, let's solve our issues. Our kid is not the source that's going to solve our issues. Our kid is not going to be our makeshift therapist or psychologist now who's going to deal with our issues. We need to deal with our issues, and because we deal with our issues, then it's going to benefit our child, right? And so I was like, man, again, our kid can't be the center of our marriage. We need to love her appropriately. We need to love her in the way that she's supposed to be loved by two parents who are in love with each other, who care for each other. And so now, why would we focus all our attention on this kid and forget ourselves? And so I say all of that to say this, it's been a note for me as a husband, as I kind of try and snap back into being a husband, which again, my wife has been very patient with that. And it's been helpful, the conversations we've been having. And I think just even that conviction I'm sharing with you now has been such a helpful thing.
So I think the biggest thing when we had Zaya had to have been, I felt like I had to find you now. Not that you were gone, but our energies were so preoccupied with this little person, and still are in many ways. But now I had to find you. I had to be intentional about connecting with you. And whereas from the time we were friends, it was just it was easy. We just did that. It wasn't something I had to think about. It just happened. I like being around this person. Let's go. Oh, we love each other. Let's get married. Okay, cool. Let's go. Oh, let's have a kid. Oh, snap. Wait, what's happening? Where am I? Where is he? I think that was that was hard. I do remember, and I think I feel like with kids, the moment you say anything sort of negative-ish, it's you said the worst thing and your child's gonna find this and think you didn't love them. But I remember grieving a version of us after we had Zaya and realizing I had to get to know a new, upgraded version of us. And that was hard. Did I regret my child? Absolutely not, for anyone who's people in the comments just think what they want to think and then they write stuff. You must listen, guys. I'm not regretting my child. My husband doesn't regret his child. But it was just grieving the way we moved, the way we lived, just our pace. We love to have chats late into the AMs. Now I'm I need to sleep, dude. This kid's going to wake up. We can't talk, So I think things like that. Just realizing I had to find you and you had to find me. That was a bit tough. Only because as humans, we don't like change. And it's almost duh, you had a kid. Obviously, your marriage is going to change. But you don't know till you actually know. But we did it. We grew. We're cool now. You're cool people.
In fact, I remember first year my child was born, I went to work a couple of weeks, in fact, now that we come back home after the hospital. And after work, come back home, and then I find both my daughter and my wife crying. It's not a screaming match. You can both tell these people are in distress. My wife is just crying because this thing is hard, it's challenging, what is happening, and there's other things as well that were happening around that time, and then my child is crying. So I come in the house and I think to myself, okay, my kid is a baby at this point. She doesn't even know what's going on in her world, but I'm okay, if from the strong conviction that she's not going to be the center of our marriage, I need to exercise that now, even in this situation. So how do I love and take care of my wife while also looking after my child? Okay, the best thing to do, and it's just practical and logical, go take my child from my wife, kind of give my wife space, okay? Just give my wife space, let her breathe so that I can look after my child, right? But that one action, right, then in my wife's head translates as, this kid is now, occupying my husband's physical presence. Okay, right? And then I think to myself, which we had this conversation later, years later, right? And I think to myself, but that was the best way for me to care for you, to love you, and to also say, you are number one. You are number one. You're not going to be number two, that my kid is number one. You are number one. And I'm taking care of you, number one, by taking the screaming child, or this kid who's crying, away from you to look after her so that you can have some breathing space. But what my wife wanted at that point was my hands, to hug her, to be there for her, right?
So I remember that day so vividly, the crying day. And it was the day when I fully realized, oh, my husband is also a dad now. Yes, you would think I would have realized it when we found out we were pregnant, or when we saw the scans, or when we gave birth. But that day, it was like, oh, this is real. I think Zaya was about a week old or something. You had gone to work, but it was like an in and out. You had to quickly go and come back. And I remember being frustrated that you even had to go and come back. I'm like, we had a baby. We're the first people to ever have a baby. Don't you understand? But you had to go to work, and then while you were gone, I was struggling to breastfeed her. And like, I'm in pain. I'm crying. She's crying because she's hungry. I'm sitting there feeling like an absolute failure. And because I catastrophize and I was a brand new mom and the hormones are flowing, I'm like, my child is going to die of starvation right this moment. I am just like a mess. And it wasn't that cute, Brooke Logan cry. It was like chunky cry. And then you walked into the bedroom and you were like, hey, what's going on? And you immediately took her, or gave her, like it was a kind of, I think, an obvious thing. I just remember my eyes were filled with water because I couldn't really see. And you took her, you went to the other room. And the reason I say that was the day when I realized, I was like, oh, this is sort of our new normal. Not that it's bad, it was just different. Was because in that moment, I needed a hug. I needed you to hug me. I needed you to tell me that I'm fine. Like, I needed to be cuddled. I needed, and you're my person who does that, when I'm chunking away like every 5 minutes. But, but I also knew that we have this little person we've prayed for who's here now. And she's a baby, and I understood that, you had to, like, sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Decompress the situation. And so you pulled her away so that I could, breathe and whatever. But it was just in that moment, not that you made me feel alone, but I felt so alone, only because I felt like only I could understand what I was feeling in not being able to provide food for my child and feeling like I was killing her and just needing someone to say, you're going to be okay. But right now, this is the best way I can do that. And so there was such a feeling of loneliness, but also I understood that this is where we are now. And there's no other way you could have done it. Heck, if the roles were switched, I would have, that's what you do. You relieve the mom so she can breathe. But I remember in that moment being like, oh, flip, this is what it is. Which is good, it was just a feeling of I've had 100% access to you within like the walls of our home, like whenever I needed to. And now it was like, okay, things are going to be a bit different now, because we have a child.
And so you think, again, such a simple scenario, such a simple situation. But one, if you don't talk about that kind of thing, what happens then? That your wife suddenly moves into her corner thinking, yeah, my husband is gone now. He's a father, and he's going to focus all his attention on our child and not me. And yet in my head as a husband, I am trying to do what is best in this situation, soothe the kid while I give my wife space. But I didn't realize my wife didn't need space. She needs my hands. But then, it's only afterwards that when the kid is quiet and I've put her to bed, I can go hug my wife. But even just that little interaction leaves things in our heads. Again, how it changes, how it shapes our marriage, etc., etc. But by God's grace, again, we speak about that stuff, and our conviction is very clear in our marriage. But all of this to say, kids will definitely change your marriage. Kids are a blessing. Kids are, a joy to have, but they will change your marriage. And I think the takeaway for us in the next 5 years, or the current 5 years that we're in now, after the first 5 years of our marriage, was that, one, let our kid take center stage. How we love each other, care for each other is going to be super beneficial for her. She's going to grow in a home that's full of love. You know how you always advise to publicly love each other. So in the house, do not just kiss in private spaces, and by kiss I mean appropriately. Now you're not going to be lamzaring your wife in front of your child, right? But just appropriate affection, so that our daughter grows up in a home where she knows, wow, my parents always loved each other. And she sees that love, how it radiates from us, and it benefits her. It radiates in the house. She knows that she can trust either one of us. And she knows as well, discipline-wise, she can't get in between the two of us because she sees how much we are a tight unit. And that's going to be beneficial for her. It's going to help her in her maturing, in her nurturing, in her growing up in a safe, stable environment. And so this is not to say, again, we love our daughter less, or I love my daughter less. It's not a matter of love, but it's a matter of priority, loyalty. It's a matter, of just getting your responsibilities right. Because once I take care of the first responsibility, it definitely helps tremendously with my second responsibility, which is my daughter. And so our kid did change, man. And as she's growing, here's another thing, man. As this kid is growing, hey, sorry to interrupt your viewing. We'll shortly get back to that episode. But if you haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. If you haven't hit the notification bell, please do that so that you're always updated on the episodes that we drop here. We want to change the nation, one husband at a time, one marriage at a time, one family at a time. So if you are inspired, encouraged by all the content that we produce on this podcast, stick around, because next week there's another husband who's going to inspire us to do exactly that.
After all these years, man, the selfish nature in Bruce just wants to creep up and just get all angry with, why am I not loved like I want to be loved? But it's like, why am I not loving like I should be loving? The command in the scriptures in Ephesians is, love your wife, Bruce.
Yeah.
You're not commanded to make your wife submit to you.
Sure. Our kid did change, man. And as she's growing, here's another thing, man. As this kid is growing, her personality is changing. And because her personality is changing, our marriage is changing as well. It's not stagnant. We're not at year 5. Again, we're at year 10. And how do we get to year 20? A lot of things are changing. And so her personality is rubbing up against our individual personalities, but it's also rubbing up against our personality as a married couple, right? And so we're learning to wrestle together with our parenting styles. And let me say this, couples, you come into your marriage with ideas of how to parent. Both of you do that. And then underneath that, you're both trying to correct your parents' parenting. And it's unfair to try and correct your parents' parenting with your children. But we do. And so what we did with my wife, we sometimes have fights and we realize afterwards that, that wasn't actually a fight. She's trying to prevent me raising our daughter in a way that she saw in her upbringing that wasn't kosher for her. And she's like, I see how you're speaking to my daughter. I see how you're doing this thing with my daughter. And it reminds me of something that happened in my upbringing. And I don't want that thing to happen. And then it's only in conversations where I'm like, yo, chick, listen, I wasn't doing that, but here's what I was doing with our daughter. And then it's like, oh, smack, I didn't see that thing. But because she's growing, she's changing, and we both coming at her with our different parenting styles, we rubbing up against each other. But it's only in those moments that we need to sit, pause, talk about these things that I think has really grown us as a couple, that has grown us as husband and wife, and it's definitely growing us as parents as we disciple, train, shape, grow this one, right? And we're learning that, man. Again, our kid is going to be in our lives for as long as we live, right? That's your second marriage, by the way. You married to your spouse and then you marry your children, because your children are going to be in your life, right, forever. And so we learning to just adjust with that. It's a beautiful adjustment. Even now as we pray, plan, think about having more children, at least this one has taught us one or two things and has really challenged the foundations of our marriage. And I think because we were fighting for each other with my wife, having a child has really stabilized our roots, our foundation in marriage.
And being somebody who wants to express everything I'm feeling all the time, immediately as it happens, when it happens, live footage, let's go. I have to learn that, no, babes, like, hold up, calm down. So that was tough, but also in the same breath, I was so grateful that you were there, that I did have a husband who who's not like, what are we going to do? You know what I mean? Who literally just figured out what to do in that moment. And so in as much as I say, like, I felt alone, like, I totally wasn't alone. And then I don't remember what happened after that. Like, newborn stage is a complete blur. But yeah, that really sticks out.
All of that to say, continuing, probably this is like year 7 and 8 into year 9. Having a child changes your mindset in terms of building a legacy, in terms of building a future together. And this is no secret. So you might know this, but you might not know this if you're new to this channel. But me and my wife were full-time musicians for 10 years, wholeheartedly pursuing a career in music. And that is a whole journey on its own. In fact, on this very channel, if you click a couple of videos at the bottom there, there's a documentary we put out called Stronger, kind of details the journey of our careers as artists, as musicians particularly. And it's a documentary that speaks about failure and how to survive failure and to recover from failure. And I think that's been the biggest theme in these 5 years of our marriage, right? The second 5 years of our marriage. That's been the biggest theme. Failure and having to survive failure, coming back out of that so that we can see how we continue doing life, not giving up, not taking a hit, punch by the chin and staying down. How do we come up again? But at the same time, how do we not let our dreams consume us, this whole language of us building, wanting to leave a legacy, wanting to do something great with our lives and the gifts and the talents that God has given us. How do we not let all of that consume us, that we just become business partners? We become dreaming partners and not husband and wife anymore. Again, if our kids are not going to take center stage, well, our dreams shouldn't take center stage as well in our marriage. But because our dreams and what we do is kind of just so very linked with our personalities, with who we are, sometimes it becomes a very strange thing in trying to separate all of that and create these boxes so that we can exist as a married couple, exist as business partners, exist as artists, So it's been a quite a journey for us to figure that out. This podcast is in fact birthed from those conversations. It's birthed from this 5 years of our marriage, where we trying to, again, learn how to dream, learn how to believe again, learn how to create again, learn how to step out again in faith, and do something that we believe God has called us to, something that's going to impact the world, particularly impact marriages in this instance, right? So I remember 2 significant things. One, my wife being diagnosed with depression and how that knocked us. And then secondly, in the midst of all of that, COVID happened. And then that, destroyed a lot of people's work. And our work kind of was also flushed with COVID-19. As musicians, you need to be gigging. As musicians, you need to be on stage. As musicians, we used to tour. And so when the whole world was shut down, it's kind of like your job, your work is shut down, right? There were innovative ways of how we could continue with our careers. But for us, there was a build-up. In fact, what's stronger from 2018? So by the time we get to 2020, it was just a punch. And while we're still dealing with that punch, and then obviously my wife is diagnosed with depression. She has to go into hospital, comes out, and she's essentially, not the same person. As much as life happens and we all change, but that's a very significant impact. And so now we have to learn how to, deal with this new thing that's in our lives. How does that impact, finances? How does that impact our intimacy? How does that impact our parenting? How does that impact our dreaming and our business? How does that impact our faith? So that was a super, super challenging time for us.
So depression. Very depressing subject. That thing sucks, man. It sucks. Sorry. it's like living with a monster in your house that's like doesn't growl, but like you feel it, you smell it, you hear it, and you're not sure how much of its face it will show on which day. And yeah, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, like at all. And we talk about this obviously more in the episode we did on depression on the previous podcast you were on, two and a half husbands. But having suspected that I had depression from childhood, or versions of it, whatever, we never got diagnosed for those things. At least our people didn't at that age. But it was always a quiet thing. It was my thing. It was the thing that no one really knows. You might suspect if you read my poetry at the time or whatever, but it was my quiet thing. And I just get sad. So I remember that at a certain time I was like, I'm just melancholic, and I just thought, melancholic. What? And I think in as much as we had some real struggles and like signs of it, I think in our second year of marriage, I can remember there were some tough moments, but I think we didn't know what we were dealing with, what it was. I wasn't even sure. And then when finally it was like, okay, girl, you are. Yeah, I think I remember just feeling very exposed. Like, I made a joke with someone who was getting married. And I was like, you know how you can lay in your bed at night after a rough day and just cry? She was like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, now you're going to have to do that in front of someone or go cry in the bathroom. So it just felt like I felt super exposed. And then in as much as I was exposed, it still felt like it's my thing. And then we went through everything we went through, right? Those however many years, again, another blur. But I think it was only last year when we were kind of reflecting on it did I realize that it was also your thing. In as much as, like, and again, very obvious because you're living with someone. Like, this shouldn't be news, right? Like, but it was. And we married. It's not like, we friends. It's not like I'm just some random person I'm not a roommate in your house, so you don't know what's going on. I hadn't realized how it had affected you. Like your own heart, your own mental health and like state of being in general, but also how it had done damage to us because I was still on, this is just my thing that I'm dealing with. And that was very hard to find out. It was very hard to, shucks man, like it was hard to realize that there was damage. I could handle, couldn't, but I could handle feeling whatever feelings I feel when I'm in a depressive state. But knowing that this thing is bleeding onto other things, most of all, the most important person to me, like that was just so devastating for me. I felt guilty, embarrassed, and feeling like, yeah, like you should just go be with someone else who's healthy and doesn't have problems. And in the same breath, it made me kind of fearful to say when I am having a rough season, but I know I have to say I'm having a rough season because he can see, you know what I mean? Or at least we can do something about it. So that was tough, that is tough. And because I'm recovering from being like, from feeling like my value is in how I perform. I'm recovering from that. I have to stop myself from being like, I'm good, or like I'm over it. I have to, because I'm afraid that if I don't, then I'm going to do more damage. Like, it's like living authentically and living honestly while being vulnerable to the risk and trusting that you are there and you trusting that I'm there, But yeah, I definitely felt and still feel the cost of dealing with my depression and my anxiety, and the insomnia. Because what is sleep anyway? Yeah, we shouldn't be laughing. Also, I think the thing that shocked me the most from that episode was how many husbands said my wife is dealing with this. Like, that was wild to me. And like people we know or are acquainted with. And then I'm like, wait, what? You know, and there were a few guys as well who just came forward, you know. I don't know if they were married or unmarried, but you know, you can read on a comment that this is a man. Like, I'm so glad somebody spoke about this. And again, it just made the risk of doing that and coming out like that to, like, so, how do I say it? Like, worth it. Because there were things in the episode that I hadn't known about, like the cost of the depression. Like, I fully understood that when we did that episode. Because when are we going to sit and go, hey, Black, what did my depression cost you? Like, when are we going to have that kind of conversation? You know? But that was shocking. But also sad, because again, I keep thinking we were the generation of kids who were told if you can dream it, you can do it. You know? And I'm like, you too? What's going on? What is this? I don't know, man. But we press on. We press on.
But as I sit here, 10 years in, I'm like, thank God that we went through all of that, and not thanking God just for the circumstances or the scenarios, because I'm like, who wants to thank God for depression? Who wants to thank God for COVID? But thank God that He is sovereign, He is good, He knows what was best for us, He knows how He could use all of those things to make us stronger, to make us look more and more like Him. And through that, we love each other better. Through that, me and my wife's communication has just, astronomically grown. Through that, our parenting has significantly changed. Through that, just our zeal to want to continue seeing what God has placed in our hearts come to fruition has significantly grown. This whole thing of us changing our channel into the dream space was really inspired by that, was birthed from that, that we're seeing that God is doing other things that are significantly bigger than what we've been doing before, and things that just don't involve us, but involve you guys, that involve other creatives, that involve other people. And so it's just been such an awesome thing. And again, getting lost in the noise of all of that. How do we find space to be husband and wife? Here's just a scenario to paint the picture. We worked together before when we were still musicians. We were on tour together. We were on stage together. We were performing together. But what happens then is that you get off stage or you leave the office and you go have lunch. And you could think that lunch is, time that you spend together. But you don't realize that your wife actually needs a date night. You don't realize that your wife needs to be taken out. But in my head, I'm like, yo, man, we were together the whole time, all right? So what's another date night? Because we hung out for lunch. What's another, getting dressed, smelling good, going somewhere. And slowly, I take advantage of my wife. Slowly, I take advantage of just, dating her. Being romantic with her, just massaging her in a different way. And so then it's in those times where we really had to learn hard how to pause all of this. How do we pause all of this, man, so that we can see each other? How do we make sure that when I get on this microphone and speak about becoming a husband who shows up, a husband who's trying to know better so that he can do better, my wife is not watching these episodes back and she's thinking to herself, dog, but that's not you, man. Like, you're lying, right? It's hard, right? How does she watch this thing and think you're lying to people? You're not living this kind of life that you're speaking about on these microphones. You're being a hypocrite, right? You're just coming on these cameras and you're essentially acting. And I think even creating this podcast came out of that, where one, my own story of, seeing my dad being there in my life for the first 15 years, how he loved my mother, etc., and now how he bounced, and not wanting that to be other people's stories. That's one. Secondly, wanting to help other husbands who are walking alone, who don't have anybody, and not enjoy the benefit of community like I do with some of my brothers who are husbands. But number two, just from the conversations that me and my wife are having, and then thinking how many other couples out there are, one, not having these conversations, and they probably need somebody who's just going to start the conversation with them. In fact, I remember a friend of mine saying that all the episodes that we've been putting out have been really helping him and his wife to just start talking. So it's like, how do we broach the subject? And if we just watch this podcast could be the thing that stands in between us to kind of say, hey, this is safe ground. We can speak about this, right? And so all of that has been such a beautiful thing. But I think lastly, I just did not want to come up here and be a hypocrite, at all. And so even watching back some of these episodes have been such a helpful thing, rather, that I'm grateful for between me and my wife in our marriage, that as we look back, she's like, wow, Smack, I didn't realize that you thought about this particular subject in this way, and maybe it's a thing of me saying, hey, I've been saying it, but maybe on the podcast, because I had a guest, I said it differently and it hit you in a way that you understood now. Cool, let's continue the conversation that we were having. Or for her to come on and say, hey, listen, you said this on this episode. This is what I was actually feeling. Oh, Smack, we can recorrect the conversation. I can come back and be like, oh, dope, that's what you actually meant, right? So all of this has just been super dope. But again, how do we not lose each other? How do we make sure that we are still husband and wife in all of these good things that are happening, in us learning how to dream, learning how to create, learning how to be in people's spaces again, using our gifts, our talents, our resources, and all that God has blessed us with, so that we can share that with you, and at the same time not just getting lost in the noise, becoming business partners or just creative partners, but actually becoming husband and wife, right?
So I guess now with where we are, where we are quite aggressively, building our business, building everything that we're doing and everything that's about to come out, look out. But on a serious note, like with where we are now, the challenge I find is, again, having to find you and you find me. Because I thank God that we found a way where, and it was something I actually really did pray about, because I was nervous about us working together again, and not just for people who saw us perform on stage, but like literally working together. I was nervous what that would look like. But like for me personally, I've been able to very much draw a line where we've literally left the house and we're fighting, and we get to the office and we get what we need to get done, or we in the office, it's a tense meeting, and we go home and we're home. And I'm thankful for that. But I do find that because our business and work is so intertwined with our life, and just that's just the stage it is at for now. I feel like I have to remember to ask you how you are. Not just, have you emailed that person? Have you done this? Because we can talk for the whole day, and I realize that we've only spoken about work, which we're excited about because we're doing what we want to do and things are coming together and it's great. So you're having this really great moment. It's not like, work. It's really it's fun. But by the end of it, I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Didn't Black say that he had a sore, neck this morning? How's his neck? It's just like, we actually haven't hung, or even having to switch off work talk. And how you can be together but not be together. But now I think with building a family, building the business, and life is just different. It's like, shucks, having to be more intentional now. Which again, kind of with when we had Zaya, I have to learn a new version of us. I mourned the thing of, when Black is in work mode, he might forget that we haven't hung out in 10 days. As in the kind of hanging out I'm talking about. And not to be like, see, he doesn't love you, it's done, the marriage is dead. Just to be like, no, he's just working. He's sleeping at 3 a.m. every day and waking up at, hey, Black, let's hang out. Whereas before I didn't have to do that. So I mourn that. And the challenge is now building, what do we look like now? And I guess that'll just be the journey as we continue from 10 to 20 to 30 and then maybe 40, because that's a really long life. Like, ugh. But until I die first, then you'll figure out what you're doing. We'll be doing this until I die first.
Statistically, men die before.
I don't care about statistics. My God defies.
So that's been such a dope thing for us to learn, to be challenged with, for us to grow from, and I think it's just been super dope. Even as we think about the next 10 years of our marriage, and thinking, okay, cool. How do we take our child, who's been a very vital part of our marriage, the second 5 years of our marriage, and how do we take this, us being creatives, business partners, dreaming creators, etc., and how do we use all of those things that we are learning in these aspects of our marriage to kind of carry us forward, but also use these things as reminders to not get lost in the noise. I don't know how you guys treat your careers with your spouse. If you're a husband, how do you manage your career with your wife's career? How is that playing out in your own marriage? If you have kids, if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids, how is that looking like in your marriage? How is that playing out in your own marriage? I think it would be dope for us just to hear. So again, leave a comment, man. Let's engage. Let's see how we can continue celebrating, the marriages that we have with our wives. How can we continue celebrating all that we're learning that's going to carry us for the next 10 years? In fact, let me end it here. The next episodes that we're going to be dropping, we had the privilege of sitting with a phenomenal gentleman, amazing dude who's been married for 33 years. 33 years. Whenever we think of 30, we think, are we even going to make it? Because again, it's just like marriage is such a beautiful thing, but also a challenging thing. But it's so dope to see people who've been walking the journey for that long, for 33 years. How did they get there? What are some of the things that we can learn? What are some of the things we can glean from them that will help us? What is some of the wisdom gems that we can get from them? And just purely inspiration, man. Hearing somebody say that they married for that long, how is the quality of their marriage? How is the quality of their relationship with their spouse? And what inspiration can we get from that that will also help us and motivate us as we continue loving our wives, as we continue showing up and becoming the husbands who are failing forward, taking responsibility, just being there and accountable to ourselves, to our spouse, to brothers, if we have brothers that are keeping us accountable, so that we can also, sit here 30, 20 years from now and say, yo, man, this has been such a dope thing. See how I've loved my wife, see how I've grown from being married to my wife, see how kids have benefited from this, see how those who are watching us have also benefited from this, right?
So I remember when we got married and we were like a few months in, and there was a couple who, she was talking to someone and the person asked, how long have you been married? She's like, 3 years. And I was like, 3 years. Yeah, man. And then there was someone else who had hit 10 years. I was like, yes, like 10 years. That's a long time. I was scared of like adding on the years because I think because of TV and just how people, the ball and chain metaphor, all that stuff, like it can look like, their love is gone, man. So now that we hit 10 years, I'm like, but it's nice here. Like, this is cool. It doesn't feel how I was, it doesn't feel how I was afraid it would feel. Yeah. Like crusty and like, it really doesn't, like, at all. So I think Lily, in that first couple of months of marriage, would be scared to hear someone talk about 33 years of marriage or like brace yourself. But I'm quite excited to watch that episode. I'm excited to hear like in the same way at that time 10 years felt like a lifetime away. I'm like, and now we're here. I'm like, 33 years, it's an extra 23 for us. Might feel like a lifetime away, but it'll be here, and I'm excited to see what it could potentially look like for people who've been there, what we can learn from them, of what to do or what not to do. And just the idea that like you can love someone for that long and like choose to love them and that it's possible,
So stick around for that. That's coming out in the next 2 weeks. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. If you haven't hit the subscribe button, do so. If you haven't hit the notification bell so that you're updated every single time we drop a new episode. And we do that every Wednesday at 11:30. So make sure that you here to come check out what we have to say, who we're speaking about, which husband is going to help us learn better, which husband is going to challenge us, which husband is going to, just give us inspiration and motivation for us to keep on going, so that we have a legacy of good marriages, healthy, quality marriages that we want to see change this country, change the world, change the future for our children, and inspire those who are not married, who desire to get married and might even have fears, to say, hey, listen, you can do it. You can do it. There's a possibility. Marriage is such a dope thing. Marriage is such a good thing. Jump on. It will be dope for you as well. All right? So let me end it here. This is Black Newborn on That Husband Podcast, where husbands try to know better so that we can do better. See you next week. Make sure you don't miss those episodes. All right? Peace.
I think it's been a journey, and I hope I've loved her well, because she's my wife, and I hope that that I have loved her well. I think that would be my hope there.